Ukraine versus Russia war. Recent major developments. September 2025. 1. Overview. As of mid-September 2025, the war between Ukraine and Russia remains intense, with significant aerial attacks, drone warfare, political maneuvers, and shifting front lines. Ukraine is working to reclaim territory. Russia is attempting to pressure NATO and exploit weaker spots in air defense. Simultaneously, diplomatic and legislative efforts intensify in the West to isolate Russia further, increase military aid to Ukraine, and strengthen allied defense commitments. Here are the key developments, their implications, and what to watch. 2. Major military attacks and drone warfare. Russia's largest aerial assault on Kyiv and other cities. On September 7, 2025, Russia launched what is being described as the largest air attack since the full-scale invasion. Using over 800 drones, including many Shahed type, and around 13 missiles/cruise missiles, Russia struck multiple targets across Ukraine. Kyiv was hit, with a government building in the Pechersky district damaged and set on fire for the first time in the war. Civilians in residential areas were affected. Among the casualties were a mother and an infant. Ukraine's air defenses managed to intercept the majority of drones and missiles. For example, around 747 drones down. But the scale of the attack underlines both Russia's increasing willingness to escalate and Ukraine's vulnerability, particularly for civilian infrastructure. Rising drone incursions and NATO tensions. On September 10th to 11th, there was a major incident. 19 suspected Russian drones entered Polish airspace. Poland and other NATO members described it as a deliberate act and a test of NATO readiness. Poland activated Article 4, consultations among allies, rather than Article 5, collective defense, signaling concern but avoiding full military escalation. NATO scrambled jets. Some drones were shot down. Polish officials assert that such incursions are very unlikely to be accidental. This event has stoked fears that Russia is probing NATO's air defenses, potentially paving the way for broader escalation. Countermeasures and Ukrainian counterattacks. Ukraine continues active counterattacks into Russian territory, especially targeting energy infrastructure, hostile drone launch sites, supply lines, etc. For example, recent strikes in the Belgorod, Voronezh, and Krasnodar regions. The Ukrainian military command reported that in the last month, Ukraine recaptured roughly 62 square kilometers in Donetsk, which is significant compared to Russian gains. 3. Political and diplomatic developments. Ukraine-US cooperation, sanctions, and joint arms production. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had a meeting with U.S. envoy Keith Kellogg to discuss bolstering sanctions on Russia and joint production of weapons and drones. This reflects Ukraine's push to not just receive aid, but also increase its domestic and allied defense industrial capacity. The discussions also included tightening tariffs, using coordinated economic pressure to degrade Russia's war machine. U.S. Senate bill. Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. A bipartisan U.S. Senate bill proposes officially designating Russia a state sponsor of terrorism, citing the abduction of nearly 20,000 Ukrainian children during the invasion. The bill argues that Russia is assimilating some children, sending others to military camps, and that such actions amount to crimes against humanity. If passed, this designation would bring Russia into the same category as Iran or North Korea in U.S. legal framework, enabling tougher sanctions, restrictions, and international stigma. International response and NATO's role. Western European leaders condemned the airstrikes and drone incursions. Germany pledged to enhance air policing over Poland. Other NATO members are discussing joint air defense systems, particularly in light of cheap drone swarms being used. The UN scheduled an emergency meeting to address the Polish airspace breach. Humanitarian, economic, and financial strains. Ukraine has submitted a formal request to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, for a new funding program. With about 60% of its national budget now going toward military spending, Ukraine is under increasing pressure to maintain social services, public sector pay, pensions, etc. The war continues to hurt civilians. Deaths, injuries, displacement, damage to infrastructure, power shortfalls, especially with approaching winter, and rising economic hardship. The strain is visible not only in Ukraine but in neighboring countries taking in refugees, and in global energy markets. 4. Shifts in the front lines and strategic gains. Russian advances have slowed. Between August 12 and September 9, 2025, Russia gained about 160 square miles of Ukrainian territory. a notable drop from the prior period, July mid-August, when it gained 241 square miles. Ukraine has managed to take back territory in Donetsk, though Russia claims broad offensives elsewhere. Both sides appear to be preparing for intensified operations in key regions, especially along the Eastern Front, Donetsk, Luhansk, and southern supply lines. Also, winter is a looming factor, affecting mobility, equipment, logistics. 5. Implications and what to watch. Here are implications of these events and what to watch for in coming weeks. 1. Escalation risk with NATO. Drone incursions into NATO territory, e.g. Poland, might provoke stronger commitments, possibly even deployment of more defensive systems or troops. How NATO responds with Article 4 versus Article 5 and how unified the response is matters a lot. 2. Increased demand for air defense technologies. Interceptor drones, advanced radar, Patriot or equivalent systems, multi-layered defense, cheap drone countermeasures plus missile defense, will be more in demand. Ukraine and its allies are pushing for joint production. 3. Political and legislative pressure on Russia. Bills like the US one to designate Russia a terror sponsor, coordinated sanctions, penalty on countries continuing to buy Russian oil/gas. All of these will shape economic viability of Russia's war. 4. Winter is coming. Infrastructure damage, energy disruptions, electricity, heating, and logistics issues during winter will magnify human suffering and may shift strategic priorities. 5. Public opinion and media war. Civilian stories, evidence of targeting of residential or governmental/non-military infrastructure, will influence global opinion. That in turn pressures politicians to act. Disinformation and propaganda continue on both sides, trying to control narratives. 6. Potential negotiations versus war continuation. Despite requests and proposals, peace talks appear distant. Ukraine insists on stronger security guarantees and return of seized territory. Russia demands its own terms, control of Donbass, Luhansk, etc. How the war evolves in the next few months, territory changes, attrition, external support, will significantly affect whether diplomacy becomes feasible. 6. Suggested headline ideas. For video or article. Russia's largest drone assault in history. Kiev government buildings set ablaze. 19 Russian drones breach Polish airspace. Is NATO ready? Ukraine regains ground in Donetsk as Russia's offensive slows. U.S. senators move to designate Russia a state sponsor of terrorism over child abductions. IMF aid and war budget. Ukraine struggle to balance military needs with civilian survival. Segment 5. Human and civilian impact. Stories of civilians, infrastructure damage, economic strain, winter concerns. 7. Conclusion/what comes next. What to watch, NATO responses, air defense support, winter logistics/supply chain crisis, opportunities or impossibility of peace negotiations. 8. Useful data and facts to include. Numbers of drones/missiles used per attack. Number intercepted versus successful strikes. Territory gains/losses. Donetsk, other regions, in recent weeks. Budget percentages for military spending versus civilian needs in Ukraine. Reports of deaths, injuries, especially civilians and children. Diplomatic legislative events. U.S. Senate Bill. Joint Arms Production Agreements. 9. Conclusion. The war is at a pivotal moment. Russia is clearly stepping up aerial drone attacks, escalating across borders, and targeting symbols of Ukrainian governance. Ukraine, meanwhile, is holding, fighting back, gaining some small ground, and appealing for more robust international aid and cooperation. NATO's security concerns are growing, especially as Russia probes its flanks and tests Allied resolve. The coming months, especially as winter arrives, are going to be harsh. The difference in outcome may well depend on how much real material support Ukraine can receive, how united NATO remains, and whether Russia's incursions cross new lines that lead to broader conflict.